So, okay, so I'm just going to jump right in. So thanks so much for joining us to listen a little bit about D1 women's wrestling opportunities. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a overview of what's going on nationally at the high school level and at the college level for women's wrestling. And so we'll just go ahead and start with this chart. And so this is data that's been taken from USA Wrestling women's membership. And so from the cards that we all prescribe to get each year. And so it shows us the demographic backgrounds from the women who have cards currently. So we know that just by looking at this data, that when we add women's programming at the college level, that we are going to be adding opportunities for a diverse group of women, which is very cool. So what does it look like right now, nationally speaking across our country, in terms of participation at the high school level? So we've had to update this graph many times recently. And so right now we are 32 states strong, with states that are offering a division for girls at the state tournament. And so even though we see that there are lots of states with this nice green and pink and blue coloring here, all states that are either offering a division at the state level or are going to be offering, we wanted to just point out that there are some of these gray states here that are also working very hard and have wonderful grassroots groups that are determined to make sure that their state also eventually offers these opportunities. So many of the states that are still gray, unfortunately, have been working for many years, and it's certainly not a lack of effort on their part. And so we keep our fingers crossed that we'll be at 50 here quite soon. So where are we in terms of participation numbers? So the latest, most accurate data is coming out of 2019, 2020, and that shows us that there are about 30,000 women at the high school level who are wrestling in high school. And so just to point out, states like New York, for instance, that don't have official state tournaments for girls still have a high number of girls coming out to participate. So they're in that middle shade there of pink, which is between 500 and 1,000 girls who are still wrestling in that state, even though there is not a state tournament. So across the country, we're seeing women coming out. It's in fact that fastest growing high school sport for women. So in terms of college and what the growth has been there, let's take a look and see. One of the questions in the question and answer time that we had together had to do with what's the difference between varsity programming and club programming. Well, right now in our country, we have two big associations that offer women's programs. So that's the NAIA, the National Athletic Intercollegiate Association, and the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association. And so if we look here, the red bar is going to indicate the programs that have been offered since 2001 or added to the NAIA. And so we've seen steady growth there. And then the yellow bar starting in 2008 of our NCAA programs. And so there has been rather recently this spike in programs that have been offered in both associations. And then if we look at the purple rectangles that are above each of these bars, it shows us the participation numbers across the country at the high school level. So that's also been steadily increasing, and then very recently that spike as well. These little teardrops here are the indications of the states that are offering those divisions at the state level for the championships. So very early on here, it was 2, 3, 4, 6, and then these big spikes towards the end, 14, 19. And then over here, I've added 2021 and 2022, where we've gone from 24 to now we have projected in 2022 that there will be those 32 states that offer a competition at the state championship. So we know that as the number of high school wrestlers increases, we also need to see that the number of college programming increases. So this is a great chart just to give you an idea of what is offered collegiately. as varsity programs. So here again are those two big associations, NAIA and NCAA. We're adding another association here, lots of acronyms, NJCAA, which is the Junior College Athletic Association. So when we're looking to see, okay, well, I definitely want to be part of a varsity program, you're going to look at one of these associations when you are trying to identify schools that you want to apply to. So all of these associations, all three of them now either have emerging sports status or invitational sports status. So that's a change from when, from 2001 to about 2018, when the WCWA, which was the Women's Collegiate Wrestling Association, was the national championship. So they held the national championship every year, and the schools that are now part of these separate associations, they wrestled in that national championship. But now fast forward to where we are now, the 38 schools in the NAIA, the 42 schools in the NCAA are going to compete in their own national tournament. So they can also still compete in that WCWA, but they're going to consider that national tournament within their association, their nationals. So right now we're going to focus a little bit more on the NCAA association. And so for their national championship each year, they are combining their divisions. So Division I, Division II, and Division III will compete in the same nationals that will eventually become the official NCAA women's wrestling tournament once we reach championship status. So right now we're still in emerging sports status. Lots of different organizations, Wrestle Like a Girl, National Wrestlers Coaches Association, USA Wrestling have worked super hard to make sure that we achieve this status. And now we have 42 schools. 40 was the magic number. So we are already working on developing that paperwork and meeting those requirements to now go into championship status. Now that can take a little while, so it's not immediate. It's not like we hit 40 schools and we're automatically in that championship status. So it's going to take a few years still. So we'll be kind of hanging out there at 42 schools, hopefully more, and in that emerging status for a little while. So if you're still thinking to yourself, well, which schools are in which associations? This presentation, Sisterhood of Wrestling, is going to actually share it out with you guys afterwards. And so you can click on this link right here when you get this presentation, and this will give you that comprehensive list of which schools are in each association. I will take you right to Transition Wrestling, which is another great website run by Gabby Klein-Lords, and it will list out all of those schools. So again, focusing on the NCAA association, where are those 42 schools? Well, if we look here, most of them are located on the East Coast or within the Midwest. 24, those yellow dots, are Division III schools. 16 are Division II, and unfortunately, only 2 are Division I. So where are those Division I programs? Well, the first program is Presbyterian College, and so that's in South Carolina. And so if you are looking to compete at the Division I level, there are 2 programs that are already established, and these are 2 coaches that you would want to reach out to. So Mark Cody is the coach at Presbyterian. And then the second program is Sacred Heart University, and that is in Connecticut. And Sacred Heart has recently hired a women's coach, so Paulina Biga, and her email address is here, as well as John Clark, who is the men's coach, who's very supportive of women's wrestling, and also have included his email address here as well. But regardless, even though there are only right now 2 women's varsity programs, every D1 school can create women's wrestling opportunities. So the big picture, the big message is that we don't want to be waiting for athletics departments or administrators to approve varsity programming if we're not ready for that yet, or if they're not willing to do that. We want to take steps forward to develop non-varsity programming so there is some momentum building up at these schools. We want to get wrestlers on campuses. One of the big things that we've learned through sports like rugby is that when they have the opportunity to add a new sport, so if an athletic administration at a D1 school is thinking, okay, we want to add a women's sport, they're going to do some surveying of the current student body. And if there are no current female wrestlers on campus or student body members that are aiming to see this happen, then chances are it won't. So we know that through watching what's happened with women's rugby, there are not many high school rugby players across our country. I would say under 1,000 was what I'd heard the last time we had checked. Compare that to 30,000 female wrestlers, so much fewer high school rugby players. And yet we see varsity programming starting for rugby at the college level. And so why is that? It's because they've done a wonderful job of creating momentum on college and university campuses. And so we want to look at that and we want to replicate that. We need to see opportunities be created, and we can't wait for them to say, yes, we're granting you this varsity wrestling opportunity. There are steps that we can take. So what are those steps? Well, before we get into the non-varsity steps, let me just super quickly explain the varsity pathways. So there could be an instance where there is a school that's ready to take on a varsity program. And so that can be created 3 different ways. We can create a women's wrestling program alongside a men's program. Okay, so it's if the men's program is already existing, then we can just work to try to build a women's program alongside that program. We can also create a women's program and a men's program at the same time, or we can create a women's program alone with no men's program. But I should say, if that is the case and you are ready to start varsity programming, Julia Salata is the person that you can email. So Julia works with the Women's Collegiate Wrestling Coalition. She's the executive director. And this coalition is the group that is taking emerging sports status, our NCAA association from emerging sports status to championship status. So this group is working to meet all the requirements set by the NCAA. They've worked to establish this NCAA Women's National Championship that will become the official championship once we hit that status. And so they're working super hard, and she's the person that's going to help you through that process of developing that varsity programming proposal. This is the website here to the link for the Women's Collegiate Wrestling Coalition. And that's what their logo looks like, so you can recognize that. But you know, most schools aren't ready to jump right into a varsity program. So how do we create this momentum at schools and universities? So here's this young lady who's getting ready to go to college, and she's thinking of what are her opportunities. So if you're going to a school that doesn't have a varsity women's program, the 3 options, and these can overlap, are rostering on the men's team, creating or being a part of an existing women's freestyle club, or utilizing the regional training center. Okay. And that's just listing those out again. So let's jump into the men's roster. So if you're rostering on the men's team, and this is not going to be for every athlete, the first 2 options are going to be for more of our more experienced athletes. This is going to be something that would only be sort of a beginning for women's programming at a college or university. So if, for instance, Marisol on the question and answer section, she was talking about how she was off to Lehigh her first year as a freshman. And so that might be something that she would have considered because there wasn't already existing women's programming there. So she would have wanted to access in a non-COVID year the coach and ask her questions about whether or not this could be an option for her. She's a more experienced wrestler. There wasn't current women's programming there. Is it an option for her to roster on the men's team? So it has to be an athlete that is comfortable working out with the men's team. Athletes choosing this path should also consider forming or becoming part of a freestyle women's wrestling club. So it's really, if you think about it, it's like the beginning of starting the process of building programming for women at the school. So if the athlete qualifies, they can also train at the RTC that's affiliated with the university. And then competing, if you're rostered on the men's team, would be competing in the open tournaments. So every year there are over 30 women's collegiate open tournaments that are offered. And that is a way that women rostering on the men's team, women who are part of the RTC or women who are part of any kind of wrestling club can compete. So they can be a part of those open tournaments, over 30 of them. They can also be part of USA Wrestling's wrestling tournaments So going on USA Wrestling's website and all the events that are listed there that are events that they would want to participate in can be part of their competition schedule, and then feature matchups before or after men's collegiate events. So that's a question you're going to want to be asking when you're contacting these coaches. Is this an option? Can I compete in these feature matchups during your events that you currently hold? Would you be open to helping me set those up? Would be another question. We also want to think about opening up Division I men's tournaments and adding a women's division to those. So that's not something we've seen in the past, but certainly something that we're going to be pushing for and asking for coaches to consider. So what are the pros of rostering on the men's team? Well, it does provide experienced female wrestlers the opportunity to attend and train at D1 schools that don't currently have that established women's programming. Female athletes can train with the men's wrestling team and also compete in those open freestyle events. Female athletes rostered to the men's team increase visibility for women's wrestling and can spark interest for future athletes. So there is going to be a high interest level when other high school athletes across the country see that there are a select few women's wrestlers that are included on D1 rosters. It creates a buzz, it creates interest, and it's exciting to see that females are going to be included. The 1 to 2 women who are rostered on the men's team, because it isn't a finalized solution, so we're not going to see 5 to 10 to 15 women included on these rosters, but it's a beginning, right? And they can work when they're on these men's roster teams to also work to establish that women's freestyle wrestling club. It gives female wrestlers access to the school, so this is important. So it really adds in terms of your athlete experience to be rostered on the men's team, because it gives you access to sports medicine. It gives you access to strength training, to coaching that's at a higher, at a higher level. Excuse me. It also exposes the athletic administration to women's wrestling. So they may have never seen it before. To see a female on a wrestling bench at a duel, maybe even in athletic cut gear or wrestling gear that's fit to her and tailored to her, is powerful. So it sends a message for sure. So pros and cons, here are the cons. So it is not a long-term solution. We're not going to see women continue to grow on men's teams. So we can't just be happy with seeing that happen. We have to continue to think about other more powerful long-term solutions. It should be done in conjunction with working to develop a varsity or club women's wrestling program. So there's still lots of work that has to be done, even if that does happen. Some schools do have roster caps, and so it's not going to be possible at every school. A coach might be told that this is the total number of athletes they can have on his or her team, and so it wouldn't make sense for them to add women to the team because they're already limited in that way. And honestly, each school has different rules, and it just might not be an achievable option at every institution. So I'm going to pause there. A lot of information I'm kind of throwing out there. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, thanks for hanging in with me. I know I'm spitting out a lot of information. All right, so pathway number 2 is that a regional training center option. And so what is that going to look like? So we talked a little bit in the question and answer section about having to qualify. So you do need to meet the criteria in order to train with the RTCs. I do below here, and this, I'll kind of just scoot down here. I do have the criteria link here listed, so you can click here and be able to read about all the ways that you can qualify. I do also have a link here where you can see where the RTCs are located. So is it close to a school that you're interested in or not? I'm going to go ahead and say that this is not a comprehensive list. When I was looking at it, I saw that some of the RTCs are missing. So definitely a question that you want to ask when you're reaching out to college coaches is, are you affiliated with an RTC? What RTCs are near you? So with that in mind, I'm going to scoot back up here. And what would the training look like? Well, you would, if you qualify, be included on those scheduled workouts with the regional training center, remembering that they train in freestyle only, which is fabulous because that's what we train in at the college level for female wrestling. Athletes must meet criteria. Athletes can train with the RTC and also be part of the freestyle women's wrestling club. And then what is the competition going to look like? Again, those over 30 open tournaments are things that you can participate in, the USA Wrestling events. And to be honest with you, again, this is an option for a more experienced athlete. We are seeing some athletes who are really vying for world team spots, have Olympic aspirations, who are skipping the college scene, not because maybe they're even wanting to choose an institution that's more academically driven, but because they want to focus more on competing at an RTC and training for these USA Wrestling events where they can qualify for world teams. So this is a real option, these RTC affiliated universities for those types of athletes. So they can also compete in scrimmages, clinics with D1, D2, and D3 teams. Our Division I women's wrestling organization is working super hard now to develop explicit information on how that competition is going to look for these types of athletes and what the options can be. And so more to come on that. So make sure you're following our pages. Feature matchups at men's college wrestling events. And I don't know if you guys had watched during the pandemic that there were several cards that came out that were run from the different RTCs. And so they were matching up women, and those were obviously wonderful competition opportunities for those RTC athletes. And a lot of times those events or those matchups came about because athletes who were at those RTCs were asking. They were like, hey, can I be part of the card? Can you add me to the card? And so like Talia was talking about in the question and answer, just developing those relationships with the coaches at the RTCs and with the coaches at the D1 programs that are affiliated with the RTCs, coming to the practices, having conversations, networking, and you can build those in those competition opportunities for yourself. So the pros of the RTC, it provides a high level of freestyle training for women who are more experienced in the sport. Absolutely. Athletes who are looking to compete heavily, like I said, under the USA Wrestling umbrella and in freestyle might opt to devote most of their time and train with an RTC as opposed to going more of the college varsity route. But that doesn't mean that you can't attend a D1 school that's affiliated with the RTC. Regional training centers typically have well-established relationships with nearby wrestling programs and could help develop those collaborative relationships. Athletes have access to coaching support for competitions throughout the year. And this is going to vary from RTC to RTC. You know, not every RTC is set up for women's programming, especially coming out of COVID. So it's just something that we're going to hope to try to build. And by having women reach out and ask questions, it's going to be showing these RTC coaches and these RTCs that the women want the programming. Athletes can be a part of an RTC and also be involved in helping to grow a female wrestling club at their school. So cons, obviously you have to qualify to be part of it. Regional training centers are not directly attached to D1 schools, so there are no on-campus benefits. So just because you're part of the RTC doesn't mean that you get the D1 coaching at the school, or that you get access to the athletic training or to the varsity weight room or things like that. It's not connected to the school in that capacity. Participation in the RTC alone will not allow the athlete to meet eligibility requirements to wrestle in what is now considered, it's called the National Collegiate Women's Wrestling Championship, which will eventually become the NCAA Women's National Championship. So RTCs are not part of the criteria that you have to meet in order to be in that event. They are telling us, the Women's Coalition is telling us that if we have clubs that meet certain criteria, they can be part of that NCAA Women's Championship. But that's sort of getting into the weeds. But just being part of an RTC will not allow you to do that. So again, here's that criteria and the locations. And then the final freestyle wrestling, or the final pathway, is the Freestyle Wrestling Club. And this is the most inclusive option. And so we do want to, and I really want to stress this, that I think women's wrestling sometimes, and females that are involved in women's wrestling often feel like they have to give 110% to be able to be in certain rooms. And I think at the Division I level, there could easily be that misconception, right? That you have to be the star athlete to be involved. You have to be the athlete giving 100% and having it being your top priority. Well, we don't want to see that. We want to see an inclusive situation. And differentiation for all levels of women's wrestling. And so the Women's Freestyle Club does that. It is going to be a place where someone who is brand new to wrestling can receive benefit, all the way up to someone who is having Olympic aspirations. And so it really is how you set up this club and how you run it, who's a part of it, and it will vary at each school. So this is just a graphic to show, the Women's Freestyle Club could include someone who is also already part of the RTC with this, affiliated with the school and is a very experienced wrestler. The Women's Freestyle Club could include a male athlete who's on the D1 team at the school, who just wants to be a part of building opportunities for the sport he loves. Maybe he's going to help with coaching. It could also be someone who's brand new to wrestling and wants to give it a try, maybe get some workouts in, not compete, but just be part of the legacy building. It could include someone who is already at the D1 school, who loved wrestling in high school and gave it up because they wanted to attend a certain university, but now can't wait to get back onto the mat. It could be including someone who doesn't want to wrestle, but wants to be part of the governance of the club and the organization. So it's really going to run the gamut, and it's going to include everybody. And it's going to build the culture that we see happening through rugby clubs all across the country. It's going to build that momentum on campus so that when the opportunity to add a varsity program at a college or university comes up and they survey the student body, there's going to be an overwhelming response of, yes, we want women's wrestling. We all want to be a part of this for a varsity program as well. So we want to make sure that we are doing a good job of marketing and advertising the club to everybody. So all inclusive. And what is this going to look like training and competition wise? So the athletes involved with the club will work out on the scheduled workouts. And of course, it will look different at every school. If the athlete qualifies, they can also train with the club and with the RTC. And competitions are going to look very similar to what we talked about before. And not everybody who's part of the club has to compete. Like I said, it can be just something from someone coming and trying to learn a little bit about wrestling and get a workout, all the way up to, the coaching that you provide for the club could also serve those more experienced wrestlers. So the funding for the club is going to look different at every school, but what we've learned through different clubs that have been formed, these clubs are affiliated with the school. So there is a national organization that has women's club wrestling, and we've had some questions about that. There are some clubs that are not affiliated with the colleges or universities. What we're doing is making sure that they're women's freestyle clubs that are part of the sports and recs department. So that's important to understand. And so funding can be provided through the schools once the club is approved. So many of the clubs that we've had approved will have to go through some kind of pilot year or probationary year before they will get some of the funding that is listed on the website for the school and under the sports and rec department. But in most cases, they can fundraise and host their own fundraisers and also receive funding from alumni donors. And then after that probationary period, then they can be part of the funding process through the school. So pros and cons of starting a women's freestyle club. The club, the big pro is the club does lay the groundwork for a varsity program and can promote or recruit for a team rather than the individual. So really rostering on the men's team and the RTC route are more focused on those more top tier or top of the triangle athletes that have more higher aspirations in the sport. And what the freestyle club does is it opens it up to more women. And I love the idea of the freestyle club. I think some people think like, oh, well, a club isn't really it's not really a serious thing. Well, it can be. The club has facets of it that can really serve all of our wrestlers. And I love that it can also serve brand new wrestlers who want to come and check out the sport and be part of it. An active club team shows the administration that the student body has interest in the sport. That is, I'm going to say that one more time because it's so important. An active club team shows the administration that the student body has interest in the sport. It's so huge. It provides a way for women to be entered into track wrestling's female OPC system, the Optimal Performance Calculator system, so they can certify to wrestle at OPC events. So this is huge because it provides a vehicle for a club now to be part of the weight certification process. So in order to participate in some of these events, women have to also go through the same eligibility and compliance that other varsity women's sports or varsity women's teams need to go through. And so by having a club and a governing body within track wrestling, that is freestyle women's wrestling clubs, we can register athletes through the OPC system. It's getting into the weeds a little bit here, but it's an important aspect of the club system that we're seeing develop. Club teams meet part of the criteria needed to participate in the National Collegiate Women's Wrestling Championship, the intermediary NCAA National Championship. So by starting a club, you're starting the process. If some of the women who are more experienced in that club want to eventually work towards being able to participate in that national championship. Women's wrestling clubs can support athletes of all skills and experience levels by partnering with a nearby regional training center or rostering qualified athletes on the men's team. So again, it overlaps with the other pathways. Doing this allows the growth of women's wrestling to be promoted through multiple pathways and by all individuals. And really, there's not many cons to starting a female wrestling club. One of the cons might be that you could say that more experienced wrestlers will likely need more training opportunities, but it really would be how you're organizing your club and how you're setting it up. So we had some questions about competition opportunities. So I think this slide is super powerful because on this side, we're going to look at varsity options, and on this side, we're going to look at non-varsity options. And as you can see, there aren't really that many competition options that aren't offered to our non-varsity athletes who are competing in the RTC or the club or the men's roster pathways. So the combined or shared competition opportunities, again, are those over 30 women's collegiate opens, the USA Wrestling events, and a lot of these USA Wrestling events make up a portion of varsity competition schedules each year. And then again, by being part of the clubs, our athletes can compete in the National Collegiate Women's Wrestling Championship if they meet that criteria. Some of the ways that they can't compete, varsity programs do average about 4 or 5 dual or meets per season. So those wouldn't be ways that we could, as a non-varsity athletes, compete or have opportunities. And then they're also going to be restricted from competing in the NCAA national duals. But they can compete in exhibition matches at varsity men's and women's events. And then those duels and scrimmages with other clubs or varsity women's teams. So it's really going to be being creative and how we put that schedule together for those athletes. And that's what Division I Women's Wrestling is working hard on right now. So if you're ready to start a club, our organization wants to help. So you can visit clubs at d1womenswrestling.com or email us there. Visit our website, d1womenswrestling.com. And we do have some suggestions for getting started, some suggestions for what has worked at other schools. So it's super powerful to develop a working group at first when you're trying to build programming opportunities at the college or university. So you're reaching out to alumni, to men's coaches, to members of the men's team, to any women's wrestling advocates in the community, and trying to get on even a Zoom call to discuss the plan to get women's options at that school. And then the second step would be to contact the school's sports and recreation department and learn more about the process for what is required at that school for establishing a club. Okay, what are they asking for you to do? And then to develop a plan for recruiting founding members. So keeping in mind that all levels, again, of experience are welcome at these clubs. Additionally, students who want to help the club organizationally can sign up. And so we recommend, kind of with number 3 here, number 4 is considering to develop a Google interest form that you can circulate through your school email server or the social media platforms. So there's some sample Google forms here below that are linked. that you can click right on and kind of take a look at and replicate. And then once that's set up, you're sort of trying to run a parallel track of developing founding members and finding those founding members. But then you're also working on putting together your proposal paperwork. And we have developed some sample club proposals. So if you visit our website, which is linked here as well, you can look at that sample paperwork and you can cut and paste as you see fit to help you to create that proposal. And this is just a simple flow chart that we created to help you see if you're ready to either create a proposal for a varsity program or get started on some of these non-varsity options. But there is no option to do nothing, because we can take steps forward to build programming at every D1 school. And so that was so much talking, I apologize, but here is our website, D1 Women's Wrestling, and we have our social media platforms here, and we would love if you would follow us and reach out to us if you need help with something. And really the 3 areas that we're trying to work on, those big ideas, is we're trying to educate, we're trying to grow opportunities, and then we're trying to support the opportunities that we're growing. So reach out if you have ideas. The landscape of women's wrestling is changing literally by the week. And so we're trying to stay up on all of the nuances and share that with everyone as best we can. So thank you guys so much for listening. And I definitely want to see my, ooh, I'm doing pretty good here, timing wise, right? So 2 minutes.
Yes.
For questioning, for questions. So, and you know what, I know it's like kind of, we don't have too much time here, but if you do have questions, you can definitely reach out to us on our Instagram messaging and just let us know what you need help with, or if something was confusing, I could definitely break it down for you a little bit.
If anyone has any quick questions, you can unmute and ask a question. But if it's like a longer question, you can go ahead and shoot them a message or something. But if anyone has a quick question, you can unmute your mic and ask. If not, then you can meet at the other meeting, the big group meeting again, and we'll just have some closing remarks. So you guys can go ahead and do that if there's no questions.
Okay, thanks everybody.
All right.
That's what we have to transfer. We might be low.
Okay.